Karoline Leavitt was an ordinary woman with an extraordinary sense of duty. She wasn't a politician, a celebrity, or someone who craved attention. Instead, she was the kind of person you might pass on the street without giving a second glance. Quiet, thoughtful, and deeply committed to doing what was right. That day, however, her life took a turn she could never have anticipated. She found herself at a busy airport, standing beside a casket draped in the American flag, escorting the remains of a fallen soldier back home to his family. The weight of the moment pressed heavily on her shoulders. It wasn't just about carrying out a task, it was about honoring someone who had given everything for their country. Karoline knew this wasn't just another job, it was a sacred responsibility. Every step she took felt deliberate, every breath measured. The hum of travelers rushing to catch flights faded into the background as she focused on the solemnity of the mission ahead. The soldier inside that casket deserved nothing less than absolute respect, and Karoline was determined to ensure that happened. As she moved through the terminal, pulling the cart holding the casket, people began to notice. Some stopped mid-stride, their curiosity piqued by the sight of the flag-draped box. Others whispered among themselves, wondering aloud what was going on. Most reactions were respectful, a nod here, a quiet salute there, but not everyone shared the same sentiment. A few faces showed discomfort, even disapproval, as if the presence of the casket disrupted their day. Karoline tried to ignore those looks. She reminded herself why she was there, to bring closure to a grieving family, to make sure the soldier's final journey was handled with dignity. But then something unexpected happened. One of the airport staff members approached her, his expression stern. "Why are you doing this here?" he asked, his voice sharp enough to cut through the noise of the terminal. Karoline froze for a moment, caught off guard by the question. Before she could respond, he continued, raising his voice so others nearby could hear. "This isn't the place for this. Don't you think it's disruptive?" His words hit her like a punch to the gut. Disruptive? Was he serious? Karoline clenched her fists, fighting back the urge to snap at him. This wasn't about convenience or disruption. It was about honoring a hero. Still, she forced herself to stay calm. Taking a deep breath, she explained patiently, "This is standard protocol for transporting fallen soldiers. Their families deserve to have them returned home properly." Her voice trembled slightly, but her resolve didn't waver. The staff member didn't seem satisfied. He crossed his arms, shaking his head. "There are other ways to handle this. You're causing unnecessary trouble," he insisted. By now, a small crowd had gathered, drawn by the tension in the air. Passengers paused to watch, some leaning in closer to hear what was being said. Karoline felt the weight of their stares, the pressure building around her. She glanced down at the casket, silently apologizing to the soldier inside for the indignity of the situation. How could anyone fail to see the importance of what she was doing? Before long, another staff member joined the first, adding fuel to the fire. "Yeah, maybe you should reconsider where you're doing this," the second person chimed in, their tone equally dismissive. They gestured vaguely toward the bustling terminal, implying that the presence of the casket was somehow inappropriate. Karoline couldn't believe what she was hearing. These weren't isolated opinions. They were outright challenges to the very idea of honoring a fallen service member. Her heart raced as she struggled to keep her composure. She wanted to scream, to demand that they show some basic human decency, but she bit her tongue. Losing her temper wouldn't help the situation. Instead, she stood tall, her eyes locked onto theirs, refusing to back down. "This soldier gave his life for our freedom," she said firmly, her voice cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. "If we can't honor him here, then where?" The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. For a moment, no one spoke. The terminal seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Karoline felt a mix of emotions swirling inside her, anger, sadness, frustration, but also a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, someone would understand the gravity of the moment and step up to support her. As the seconds ticked by, she realized this wasn't just about one soldier anymore. It was about all the men and women who had sacrificed everything, and whether society still valued their contributions. Little did Karoline know, the confrontation was far from over. What started as a simple misunderstanding was about to spiral into something much bigger, drawing in strangers, sparking debates, and forcing everyone involved to confront uncomfortable truths about respect, sacrifice, and humanity. But for now, she stood her ground, determined to see the mission through, no matter the cost. As the tension between Karoline and the airport staff escalated, the crowd around them began to grow. People who had initially stopped out of curiosity now found themselves drawn into the unfolding drama. Some watched with expressions of confusion, unsure of what to make of the situation. Others looked on with clear disapproval, shaking their heads or muttering under their breath about how this kind of thing shouldn't happen in public. But there were also those whose faces softened as they realized what was at stake: a fallen soldier being escorted home for his final rest. The two staff members, emboldened by each other's presence, pressed harder. One of them leaned in closer, his voice rising above the murmurs of the crowd. "Look, I get it, this is important, but you're holding up operations here. Do you know how many flights are scheduled to leave? How many people depend on this airport running smoothly?" His words carried an edge of irritation, as though he believed logistics outweighed the significance of the moment. Karoline felt her chest tighten. She wanted to argue back, to explain that no flight schedule could ever be more important than honoring a hero who had given everything. But before she could respond, another voice cut through the air, a deep, steady tone that commanded attention. A man standing nearby stepped forward, his posture straight and proud. He wore a simple jacket, but something about him radiated authority and experience. Without saying a word, he walked up to the group, his eyes scanning the scene with quiet intensity. "I served," he said finally, his voice calm yet firm. The words hung in the air, silencing everyone within earshot. For a brief moment, even the hum of rolling suitcases and distant announcements seemed to fade away. The man glanced at Karoline, offering her a small nod of solidarity before turning, his gaze toward the staff members. "I spent years in uniform, just like the person inside that casket. And let me tell you something, you don't understand what this means." He paused, letting his statement sink in. Then, taking a step closer, he continued, "When someone gives their life for this country, it's not just a job or a duty. It's a sacrifice most people can't even imagine. This isn't about convenience or schedules, it's about respect. For the fallen, for their families, and for every single person who has ever worn a uniform." His voice cracked slightly, on the last sentence, betraying the depth of emotion behind his words. The crowd stirred, murmurs rippling through the gathering. Some nodded in agreement, while others exchanged guilty glances, perhaps realizing they'd judged too quickly. Even the staff members seemed taken aback, their earlier confidence wavering under the weight of the veteran's testimony. One of them shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact, while the other crossed his arms tightly, clearly struggling to find a rebuttal. Karoline watched the exchange with a mixture of relief and awe. She hadn't expected anyone to come to her defense, let alone someone with such obvious credibility. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. The veteran's intervention had shifted the dynamic, but the underlying conflict remained unresolved. Would the staff back down, or would they double down on their objections? Before anyone could speak again, another passenger chimed in. "You're telling me we can't take 5 minutes to honor someone who died protecting us?" the woman asked, her voice sharp with disbelief. She stood near the front of the crowd, clutching a carry-on bag, her face flushed with indignation. "What's wrong with all of you? If anything, we should stop everything right now and pay our respects." Her comment sparked a chain reaction. Other travelers began voicing their support, some clapping softly, others shouting encouragement. "She's right," called out a man holding a coffee cup. "This is ridiculous. Let her do her job." Another added, "We owe these heroes everything. Show some respect." For the first time since arriving at the airport, Karoline felt a glimmer of hope. The tide was turning, and it was clear that not everyone agreed with the staff's stance. The growing chorus of voices gave her strength, reminding her that she wasn't alone in this fight. Yet, despite the surge of support, the confrontation was far from resolved. The staff members exchanged uneasy looks, clearly unsure of how to proceed. They had started this argument believing they were in the right, but now they were facing a wave of public backlash. Just when it seemed like the situation might de-escalate, one of the employees made a critical mistake. In an attempt to justify their position, they blurted out, "Well, maybe if they didn't bring the body through here in the first place, none of this would have happened." The words landed like a bomb, sending shockwaves through the crowd. Gasps erupted, followed by angry shouts. "You don't talk about a hero like that," yelled a man in a baseball cap, stepping forward aggressively. Several others echoed his sentiment, their voices rising in unison. The atmosphere grew electric, charged with emotion. Even passengers who had been indifferent moments earlier now joined the fray, demanding accountability from the staff. Karoline stood quietly amidst the chaos, her heart pounding. She knew this was no longer just about her. It had become a broader issue of values and priorities. The disrespect shown to the fallen soldier wasn't just an insult to him. It was an insult to everyone who believed in the importance of honoring sacrifice. As the argument raged on, she noticed cameras flashing and phones recording. Someone shouted, "Put it on social media! Let the world see what's happening here!" Within minutes, videos of the confrontation began circulating online. Hashtags like "Read You," "Respect Our Heroes," and "Never Forget" trended rapidly, drawing attention from news outlets and activists alike. What had started as a private struggle between Karoline and a few airport employees had exploded into a national conversation. Reporters arrived at the terminal, microphones in hand, eager to capture the story. Meanwhile, the staff members, who had once felt so confident in their stance, now looked visibly overwhelmed, realizing they had ignited a firestorm they couldn't control. Despite the mounting pressure, Karoline remained focused. She knew the soldier's family was waiting, unaware of the turmoil surrounding their loved one's return. Her priority was delivering him home safely and ensuring his memory was honored properly. But as the hours ticked by and negotiations dragged on, she couldn't help but wonder, would the apology come soon enough to undo the damage? Or would this incident leave scars that couldn't be healed? The tension in the terminal reached a boiling point as the crowd's anger grew louder and more intense. Passengers who had initially been bystanders were now fully invested, their emotions spilling over into heated exchanges with the airport staff. Some shouted directly at the employees, demanding answers and accountability. Others turned to each other, shaking their heads in disbelief at how the situation had spiraled so far out of control. The atmosphere was electric, charged with frustration and indignation, but also with a shared sense of purpose: justice for the fallen soldier. One woman, holding her toddler on her hip, stepped forward and addressed the staff members. "Do you even realize what you're saying?" she asked, her voice trembling with emotion. "This isn't just about schedules or rules. It's about humanity. You're treating this like it's some inconvenience, but this man gave his life so we could stand here safe and free." Her words struck a chord with many around her, and murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. She adjusted the child in her arms and added softly, almost to herself, "What kind of world are we living in if we can't stop to honor that?" The staff members looked increasingly uneasy, shifting their weight from one foot to the other. One of them tried to defend their position again, stammering something about operational disruptions, but his voice lacked conviction. The veteran, who had spoken earlier, cut him off sharply. "Save it," he said, his tone icy. "You've already disrespected this soldier enough. Now all you're doing is digging yourself deeper." At that moment, security guards arrived, summoned by panicked calls from the staff. Dressed in uniforms and carrying radios, they moved cautiously through the throng of people, trying to assess the situation without escalating things further. But instead of calming the crowd, their presence only fueled the growing unrest. Someone shouted, "Are you here to protect them or to silence us?" Another voice chimed in, "Why aren't you making sure this soldier gets the respect he deserves?" Karoline stood silently beside the casket, overwhelmed by the whirlwind of activity swirling around her. She hadn't expected any of this. Certainly not the confrontation, and definitely not the explosion of public outrage. Part of her felt guilty for being the center of attention. After all, this wasn't about her. This was about the soldier lying in the casket, someone who had made the ultimate sacrifice. Yet another part of her couldn't deny the importance of what was happening. People were standing up, not just for her, but for every service member who had ever worn a uniform. They were saying, loud and clear, that sacrifices like these mattered, and they deserved recognition. As the argument raged on, a young man in a hoodie pushed his way to the front of the crowd. He held up his phone, showing a live video feed of the incident he'd been streaming online. "People are watching this everywhere," he announced, his voice filled with urgency. "They're sharing it, commenting, demanding action. This isn't just your airport anymore, it's national news." His declaration sent a ripple of realization through the group. Cameras flashed, phones recorded, and hashtags continued to trend. The story was spreading faster than anyone could have imagined. Meanwhile, Karoline's mind raced with conflicting thoughts. On one hand, she felt a surge of gratitude for the overwhelming support from strangers. These were people who didn't know her or the soldier personally, yet they cared deeply about ensuring his memory was honored. On the other hand, she worried about the toll this was taking on the family waiting back home. Every minute wasted, arguing meant another minute delayed in bringing closure to those who needed it most. She glanced down at the casket, silently apologizing again for the chaos unfolding around it. Finally, airport management appeared, rushing toward the scene, with expressions of concern etched on their faces. A middle-aged man in a suit stepped forward, introducing himself as the terminal supervisor. "We need to resolve this peacefully," he said, raising his hands in a gesture meant to calm everyone down. But his words fell flat. The crowd wasn't ready to listen. Not until they heard an apology and saw real change. "What are you going to do about this?" demanded a passenger, pointing accusingly at the staff members. "Are you going to let them treat our heroes like this? Is this how your airport operates?" The supervisor hesitated, clearly caught between defending his employees and appeasing the furious crowd. After a long pause, he turned to Karoline. "Ma'am," he began, his tone softer now. "We understand the gravity of the situation. We'll do everything we can to ensure the process continues smoothly." It was a start, but it wasn't enough. The crowd pressed harder, insisting on a formal apology, not just to Karoline, but to the soldier and his family. Reluctantly, the supervisor motioned for the two staff members to step forward. Their faces were pale, their body language tense as they faced the sea of angry onlookers. We apologize," one of them muttered, his voice barely audible over the din. "We didn't mean any disrespect." The response was immediate and explosive. "That's not good enough," shouted a woman near the front. "You don't get to say sorry and walk away. This is about more than just today. It's about changing the way you treat our heroes moving forward." The supervisor nodded hastily, sensing the need to act quickly. "We'll issue a formal statement," he promised, "and we'll review our policies to make sure nothing like this happens again." He paused, then added, "Please give us a chance to make this right." For a moment, the crowd seemed to consider his words. The yelling subsided slightly, replaced by murmurs of cautious optimism. Still, no one moved aside completely. They wanted proof that the airport meant what it said, proof that the soldier would be treated with the dignity he deserved. Karoline took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle heavily on her shoulders. She knew the apology, while necessary, wouldn't undo the pain caused earlier. What mattered now was finishing the mission. With renewed determination, she turned back to the casket and signaled to the handlers that it was time to move forward. The crowd parted respectfully, allowing her to pass. As she walked, she could hear whispers of encouragement. "Thank you for what you're doing. God bless you. Never forget." Each word carried meaning, each gesture offered comfort. For the first time since arriving at the airport, Karoline felt a glimmer of peace. The road ahead was still uncertain, but she knew she wasn't walking it alone. As Karoline moved forward, the crowd's energy shifted from anger to quiet reverence. The terminal, which had been buzzing with heated arguments and raised voices just moments before, now fell into a hushed silence. People stepped aside respectfully, forming an impromptu pathway for her in the casket. Some placed their hands over their hearts while others offered solemn nods or whispered prayers under their breath. It was as if the entire atmosphere had transformed, from chaos to collective mourning. The airport staff who had sparked the confrontation stood frozen at the edges of the crowd, their faces pale and drawn. They looked smaller now, almost diminished, by the weight of what they'd done. One of them glanced at Karoline as she passed, his eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and shame. For all their earlier defiance, they seemed to finally understand the magnitude of their mistake. The veteran who had spoken up earlier caught this glance and muttered under his breath, "Good. Let them feel it." Karoline didn't look back at them. Her focus remained on the casket ahead, guiding it gently toward the gate where the flight awaited. Every step felt deliberate, every movement infused with purpose. She wasn't just escorting a fallen soldier anymore. She was carrying the hopes and emotions of everyone around her. The apology from the supervisor had been a start, but actions spoke louder than words, and Karoline knew the true test would come in how the airport handled the rest of the process. As she reached the security checkpoint, a new challenge arose. Normally, transporting a casket required specific protocols, screening, documentation, coordination. But today, the usual procedures were overshadowed by the tension still lingering in the air. Security personnel approached cautiously, unsure of how to proceed without reigniting the conflict. Passengers watched intently, ready to jump in again if anything went wrong. One of the guards, a young woman with kind eyes, stepped forward. "Ma'am," she said softly, "we need to ensure everything is cleared for boarding. I promise we'll handle this with care." Her tone was respectful, her demeanor calm, and Karoline appreciated the effort. She nodded, handing over the necessary paperwork and explaining the situation briefly. The guard listened attentively, then motioned for her team to assist in carefully screening the casket. What could have been a tense moment instead unfolded smoothly, thanks to the guard's professionalism and the crowd's watchful presence. As the screening concluded, someone in the line behind let out a sigh of relief. "Thank God," they murmured. Another passenger added, "They're doing it right this time." The sentiment spread quietly through the terminal, easing some of the lingering tension. With the casket cleared for boarding, Karoline turned her attention to the next hurdle, getting it safely onto the plane. This part of the journey often involved logistical challenges, requiring coordination between ground staff, airline employees, and handlers. But today the task carried extra significance. Any misstep could undo the fragile peace that had been established. To her surprise, the airline staff assigned to assist were noticeably different from those who had caused the earlier confrontation. Their expressions were somber, their movements careful and deliberate. One of them, a middle-aged man with graying hair, approached Karoline with a clipboard in hand. "We're honored to help get him home," he said simply, his voice thick with emotion. His sincerity struck a chord with her, and for the first time that day she allowed herself a small smile. The loading process began, drawing the attention of passengers waiting nearby. Many craned their necks to watch while others bowed their heads in silent respect. A teenage boy standing with his family pulled out his phone and snapped a photo of the flag-draped casket being wheeled toward the aircraft. "Dad," he said, quietly, "is this what real sacrifice looks like?" His father put an arm around his shoulders and replied, "Yeah, son, that's exactly what it looks like." As the casket disappeared into the belly of the plane, the crowd erupted into applause. It started softly at first, a few scattered claps, but quickly grew into a thunderous ovation. Strangers hugged each other, tears streaming down their faces. Even the airport staff who had argued earlier joined in, their earlier defiance replaced by a shared sense of sorrow and gratitude. Karoline stood at the edge of it all, overwhelmed by the wave of emotion washing over her. When the applause finally subsided, she took a deep breath and prepared to board the plane herself. Before stepping onto the jet bridge, she turned to face the crowd one last time. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. This soldier deserves every bit of the respect you've shown today, and so do all, the others who serve." Her words hung in the air, met with nodding heads and murmurs of agreement. As she settled into her seat aboard the aircraft, Karoline felt a mix of exhaustion and triumph. The day had been long and emotionally draining, but it had also been profoundly meaningful. What had started as a routine mission had turned into something far greater, a moment of reckoning for everyone involved. The confrontation at the airport hadn't just been about one soldier or one casket. It had forced people to confront their values, their priorities, and the way they treated those who made the ultimate sacrifice. Looking out the window as the plane taxied down the runway, Karoline reflected on everything that had happened. She thought about the family waiting at the destination, unaware of the drama surrounding their loved one's return. She hoped they would find comfort in knowing that strangers across the country had rallied to honor his memory. She also thought about the airport staff, whose initial lack of understanding had sparked such outrage. While their actions had been misguided, she believed they had learned something valuable, that respect for heroes isn't optional, it's essential. The plane lifted off the ground, climbing higher into the sky. Below, the terminal shrank into the distance, but the impact of the day lingered. Social media continued to buzz with updates, news outlets broadcast stories, and hashtags calling for change trended nationwide. The ripple effect of the incident was undeniable, sparking conversations about how society honors its fallen and whether current systems are truly adequate. For Karoline, though, the most important thing was the mission itself. No matter what obstacles lay ahead, she was determined to see it through, to deliver the soldier home with the dignity and respect he deserved. As the flight continued, she closed her eyes, allowing herself a rare moment of rest. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now, she found solace in knowing that the soldier's journey was moving forward, and that she wasn't alone in ensuring it reached its final destination. The flight wasn't long, but it felt like an eternity to Karoline. Sitting in her seat, she stared out the window at the endless expanse of clouds below, her mind replaying every moment of the day. The confrontation at the airport, the heated arguments, the crowd's anger and eventual support, it all swirled together in a storm of emotions. She had gone from being just another passenger on a mission to becoming the center of a national conversation about respect, sacrifice, and humanity. And while part of her was grateful for the outpouring of solidarity, another part couldn't shake the weight of responsibility resting on her shoulders. As the plane descended toward its destination, Karoline braced herself for what lay ahead. This leg of the journey would be no less challenging. The soldier's family was waiting to say their final goodbyes, waiting to bring closure to a chapter of unimaginable pain. They didn't know about the chaos that had unfolded at the departure airport, and Karoline wasn't sure if they ever should. What mattered now was ensuring that their loved one arrived home with dignity intact, surrounded by honor rather than controversy. When the plane touched down, the mood shifted once again. Ground crew members approached the aircraft with somber expressions, their movements deliberate and respectful. Word of the incident had traveled fast, spreading beyond social media and news outlets to reach even the staff at this smaller regional airport. As the casket was carefully unloaded, several employees paused in their duties to pay their respects. Some removed their hats, others placed their hands over their hearts, and one older man stood silently with tears streaming down his face. It was clear that the ripple effect of the earlier events had reached far beyond the original terminal. Karoline stepped off the plane last, taking a deep breath as she entered the arrivals area. The space was quieter here, more intimate, but no less charged with emotion. A group of uniformed military personnel stood nearby, ready to assist with the transfer of the remains to the hearse waiting outside. Their presence brought a sense of order and solemnity to the scene, a reminder that this was not just a personal mission, but part of a larger tradition of honoring those who served. Before long, a woman appeared at the edge of the crowd, a representative from the soldier's family. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her face pale with exhaustion, but there was a quiet strength in the way she carried herself. She approached Karoline cautiously, extending a hand before pulling her into a tight embrace. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking under the weight of grief. "Thank you for bringing him home." Karoline hugged her back, feeling the raw emotion radiating from the woman's trembling frame. For a brief moment, words failed her. How could she possibly express the depth of her own feelings, the sorrow, the pride, the determination that had driven her through the challenges of the day? Instead, she simply nodded, letting the gesture speak for itself. "I'm so sorry for your loss," she managed finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "He was a hero, and he'll never be forgotten." The woman nodded, clutching a folded piece of paper in her hand. It was a letter written by the soldier during his deployment, discovered only after his passing. She held it close as though it were a lifeline connecting her to the person she had lost. "He always believed in doing what was right, no matter how hard it got," she said softly. "That's why I know he'd appreciate everything you've done today." Karoline felt a lump rise in her throat. She wanted to tell the woman about the airport staff, the angry crowd, the veteran who stepped forward, and the strangers who rallied around her. But something stopped her. This moment wasn't about her. It was about the soldier and his family. Whatever struggles she had faced along the way paled in comparison to the lifelong void left behind by his death. So instead of sharing her story, she simply listened, offering silent support as the woman spoke about her son, or brother, or husband, and the impact he had made on those around him. As the casket was loaded into the hearse, the small gathering broke into a spontaneous salute. Military personnel, airport workers, and even random travelers who happened to witness the scene raised their hands in unison, paying tribute to the fallen hero. Karoline joined them, her heart swelling with pride and sorrow. In that moment, differences faded away. Political beliefs, personal grievances, logistical concerns, all of it dissolved in the face of shared humanity. All that remained was respect, pure and unwavering. Afterward, as the hearse drove off toward the funeral home, Karoline lingered for a while, watching until it disappeared from view. The family thanked her again before leaving, their steps heavy, with grief yet steadied by the knowledge that their loved one was finally home. Karoline knew her role in this journey was complete, but the experience had changed her in ways she couldn't fully articulate. She had set out to escort a fallen soldier, expecting a quiet and routine task. Instead, she had become part of a movement, a catalyst for reflection and change. Back at the airport, reporters awaited her arrival, eager to hear her side of the story. Cameras flashed, microphones were thrust forward, and questions came rapid fire. What happened at the departure terminal? How do you feel about the backlash against the airport staff? Do you think policies need to change? Karoline took a deep breath, collecting her thoughts before addressing the crowd. She spoke honestly, describing the events without embellishment, emphasizing the importance of honoring service members and acknowledging the power of public support. Her words resonated deeply, earning nods of agreement from both reporters and bystanders alike. But when asked whether she planned to pursue legal action or demand consequences for the staff involved, Karoline shook her head firmly. "This isn't about punishment," she said. "It's about learning. Those employees didn't understand the significance of what they were saying, but now they do. And that's what matters. What we need is systemic change, not finger-pointing. Let's focus on making sure no family ever has to go through something like this again." Her response drew applause from the crowd, reinforcing the message that compassion and education were more powerful tools than blame. By the time she finished speaking, the sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the horizon. Karoline walked, away from the cameras, feeling drained but fulfilled. She had started the day as an ordinary woman with a sacred duty. She ended it as a symbol of resilience and advocacy. Though the mission was over, the impact of her actions would linger, for the family, for the nation, and for herself. And as she drove away from the airport, she couldn't help but wonder, how many other stories like this went unnoticed, untold? If one incident could spark such widespread reflection, What might happen if more people stood up to honor heroes in their own communities? The thought stayed with her, planting seeds of possibility for the future. The days following the incident blurred into a whirlwind of media attention, public outcry, and personal reflection for Karoline. What had started as a quiet mission to escort a fallen soldier home had turned into something far bigger, a national conversation about how society treats its heroes. News outlets couldn't get enough of her story, replaying footage of the confrontation at the airport, interviews with passengers who witnessed it, and commentary from veterans groups advocating for better protocols. Social media was ablaze, with hashtags like "Respect Our Heroes" and "Never Forget," drawing millions of views, shares, and comments. People from all walks of life weighed in, some praising Karoline's courage, others criticizing the airport staff, and many calling for systemic changes to ensure such incidents never happened again. For Karoline, though, the spotlight wasn't easy to navigate. She didn't seek fame or recognition. She simply wanted to do what was right. But now, everywhere she went, people recognized her. At grocery stores, strangers approached her to shake her hand or offer words of gratitude. "You stood up when no one else would," one elderly man told her, his voice thick with emotion. "We need more people like you." Another woman hugged her unexpectedly, tears streaming down her face. "My son served overseas," she said softly. "Thank you for reminding us not to take their sacrifices for granted." While these interactions were heartfelt and meaningful, they also left Karoline feeling uneasy. She worried that the focus was shifting too much onto her rather than the soldier whose memory deserved to be honored. Every interview request, every message on social media, every kind word directed at her felt like a reminder that this moment wasn't really about her. It was about him. Yet she understood the power of storytelling. If sharing her experience could help keep the conversation alive, then maybe it was worth stepping into the limelight, even if it made her uncomfortable. Invitations began pouring in from organizations eager to hear her speak. Veteran groups, community centers, schools, and even government bodies reached out, asking her to share her perspective on honoring service members and improving public awareness. At first, Karoline hesitated. Public speaking wasn't something she'd ever imagined herself doing. The thought of standing in front of large crowds, reliving the pain and frustration of that day, filled her with anxiety. But deep down, she knew she had an opportunity to make a difference, to turn a single act of defiance into a broader movement for change. Her first speaking engagement took place at a local veterans hall. The room was packed with former service members, families of fallen soldiers, and curious community members. As Karoline stepped up to the podium, she felt her nerves kick in. Her palms were sweaty, her heart raced, and for a brief moment, she considered backing out. But then she looked out at the audience and saw the faces staring back at her. Faces etched with grief, pride, hope, and determination. These were people who understood sacrifice, who lived with loss every day. They weren't there to judge her. They were there to listen, to learn, and to heal. Taking a deep breath, Karoline began to speak. She didn't use fancy language or rehearsed speeches. Instead, she spoke from the heart, recounting the events of that fateful day in simple, honest terms. She talked about the initial confrontation at the airport, the anger and disbelief she felt, and the overwhelming support she received from strangers. She described the weight of responsibility she carried as she escorted the casket, knowing that a grieving family awaited its arrival, and she shared her belief that everyone, whether they wore a uniform or not, had a role to play in honoring those who gave everything. By the time she finished, the room was silent, except for the sound of sniffles and muffled sobs. Several people stood to applaud, while others lingered afterward to thank her personally. One veteran handed her a folded American flag, saying, "This is for you. You reminded us what it means to stand tall." Another woman, clutching a photo of her late husband, hugged Karoline tightly and whispered, "You gave me hope that people still care." As the weeks passed, Karoline continued to accept invitations to speak, traveling across towns and cities to spread her message. Each event brought new stories, new connections, and new opportunities to reflect on the importance of remembering service members. She met families who had lost loved ones in combat, children growing up without parents, and widows struggling to rebuild their lives. Their resilience inspired her, reinforcing her belief that honoring heroes wasn't just about ceremonies or memorials, it was about supporting the living too. But it wasn't all positive. Some critics dismissed her efforts as overblown or unnecessary, arguing that logistical challenges at airports couldn't always accommodate special circumstances. Others accused her of exaggerating the incident for attention, despite the overwhelming evidence captured on video. These criticisms stung, but Karoline refused to let them derail her mission. "If I can reach even one person," she told herself, "then it's worth it." In addition to speaking engagements, Karoline collaborated with advocacy groups to push for policy changes. Together, they drafted proposals aimed at improving how airlines, airports, and other transportation hubs handled the remains of fallen soldiers. They called for mandatory training programs for staff, clearer communication protocols, and designated areas where families could grieve privately during arrivals. Slowly but surely, progress began to take shape. Airlines started reviewing their procedures, and some terminals implemented new guidelines to prevent similar incidents in the future. Through it all, Karoline remained grounded, leaning on the support of friends, family, and the countless strangers who had rallied behind her cause. She often thought about the soldier she had escorted home, the man whose final journey had sparked such profound change. Though she never learned his name or heard his full story, she carried him with her wherever she went, a constant reminder of why she kept pushing forward. One evening, after returning from yet another speaking engagement, Karoline sat alone in her living room, scrolling through messages on her phone. Among the hundreds of notes of gratitude and encouragement, one stood out. It was from a young girl, barely 10 years old, who had watched the news coverage with her parents. "Dear Miss Karoline," the message read, "I want to grow up to be brave like you. Thank you for teaching me that standing up for what's right matters." Karoline stared at the screen, tears welling up in her eyes. In that moment, she realized the true impact of her actions. This wasn't just about honoring one soldier. It was about inspiring others to honor countless others. It was about creating a ripple effect of respect, compassion, and understanding that could stretch far beyond her own lifetime. And as she turned off the light and settled into bed, she allowed herself a small smile. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she knew she wasn't walking it alone. Months had passed since the day Karoline escorted the fallen soldier home, but its impact lingered, not just in her life, but in the lives of countless others. The movement she had inadvertently sparked continued to grow, fueled by stories shared online, conversations sparked offline, and policies slowly being reevaluated across transportation hubs nationwide. What began as a confrontation at an airport terminal transformed into something far greater, a collective reckoning about how society honors sacrifice and values humanity. Karoline's calendar remained packed with speaking engagements, advocacy meetings, and interviews. She traveled often, sometimes crisscrossing multiple states in a single week, spreading her message wherever it was needed most. Each stop brought new faces, new voices, and new lessons. At one event, a group of high school students presented her with handmade cards thanking her for standing up for what mattered. "You showed us that even when things feel unfair, we can still make a difference," one teenager wrote. Another attendee, an elderly woman who had lost her husband during wartime, handed Karoline a small pin shaped like an American flag. "This was his," she said softly. "I think he'd want you to have it." These moments stayed with Karoline long after the events ended. They reminded her why she kept going, despite the exhaustion and occasional criticism. Every interaction reinforced the idea that this wasn't just her fight. It belonged to everyone who believed in respecting heroes and supporting their families. Yet amidst all the gratitude and encouragement, there were also challenges. Some days, the weight of carrying so many stories felt overwhelming. How could anyone bear the grief of widows, the longing of children, or the pride of veterans without breaking under the strain? On one particularly tough evening, after returning from a long day of meetings, Karoline sat on her couch staring at the folded flag she'd been given early in her journey. Her phone buzzed incessantly with emails, texts, and notifications, but she ignored them, needing a moment of quiet reflection. As she traced the edges of the flag with her fingers, she thought about the soldier whose memory had started it all. Though she still didn't know much about him, she imagined the kind of person he must have been: brave, selfless, determined to protect those he loved. His sacrifice had touched more lives than he could ever have imagined. The next morning, she woke up with renewed resolve. If she could honor him, and every other hero like him, by continuing to advocate for change, then she owed it to them not to give up. That mindset carried her through the toughest days, reminding her that progress rarely came quickly or easily. Change happened step by step, conversation by conversation, until eventually the world shifted just enough to make room for something better. One of the most significant milestones came when a major airline announced sweeping reforms to its procedures for handling fallen soldiers' remains. Inspired by the public outcry following Karoline's story, executives worked closely with veteran groups and advocacy organizations to develop comprehensive training programs for staff. The initiative included sensitivity workshops, clearer communication guidelines, and designated spaces within terminals where grieving families could find privacy and support. When the announcement made headlines, Karoline received dozens of messages congratulating her on the victory. But she knew better than to take credit. "This isn't my win," she told reporters. "It's a win for everyone who believes in treating our heroes with dignity." Despite these victories, Karoline understood that systemic change took time. Not every airport adopted new policies right away, and not every employee embraced the reforms enthusiastically. There were still missteps, misunderstandings, and moments of frustration, but each setback became an opportunity to educate, to remind people why respect mattered, and to keep pushing forward. Over time, the culture began to shift, not because of any single person, but because thousands of individuals chose to care. As the months turned into a year, Karoline found herself reflecting on how much her own life had changed. She had gone from someone content to live quietly in the background to someone thrust into the spotlight, advocating for causes she deeply believed in. Along the way, she discovered strengths she never knew she had: resilience, courage, and the ability to inspire others. But perhaps the most surprising transformation was how connected she felt to strangers. People from all over the country reached out to share their stories, offering words of encouragement or simply saying, "Thank you." In turn, Karoline realized that her mission wasn't just about honoring heroes. It was about building bridges between people, fostering empathy, and reminding everyone of their shared humanity. Eventually, the media frenzy died down, and the hashtags stopped trending. Life moved on, as it always does. But Karoline's work didn't end. She continued speaking, writing, and collaborating with organizations dedicated to supporting service members and their families. She also made a point to visit memorials whenever she traveled, paying her respects to those who had given everything. Standing before rows of white headstones or walls etched with names, she felt a profound sense of connection, not just to the soldiers buried there, but to the ideals they represented: duty, honor, and love for something greater than oneself. Looking back on everything that had happened, Karoline couldn't help but smile. She hadn't set out to become an advocate or a symbol of resilience. All she had wanted to do was escort a fallen soldier home. But sometimes fate has a way of turning ordinary moments into extraordinary ones. And while she might never fully understand why this particular journey fell to her, she was grateful for it. It had taught her the power of standing firm, speaking up, and believing in the goodness of people, even when times got tough. One crisp autumn afternoon, as golden leaves swirled around her feet, Karoline stood beside a memorial bench dedicated to local veterans. A plaque nearby read, "In memory of those who served so that we may live freely." She paused for a moment, letting the words sink in. Then, pulling out her phone, she snapped a photo and posted it online with a simple caption: "Grateful for the lessons learned and the lives touched along the way. Never forget." Her post received hundreds of likes and comments within minutes. Someone replied, "Your courage inspires me every day." Another added, "Thank you for reminding us what truly matters." Reading through the responses, Karoline felt a warmth spread through her chest. This journey had been hard, messy, and unpredictable, but it had also been beautiful. It had shown her that even in moments of conflict and chaos, people could come together to honor what was sacred. And that knowledge gave her hope, not just for today, but for tomorrow and all the days to come.